Now we understand that all sin is equal in the sense that all sin separates you from God, that all sin can cause you to be lost eternally, if not forgiven. But we also understand that not all sin looks the same or comes into your life in the same way. You know, some sin is very, very obvious. You can see it in yourself. You can see it in those around you. But other sins are hard to see. They can appear unintentionally, but gradually lead you down a road that you never thought you'd go. Some people can actually be so deeply involved in a particular sin and not even another soul on this earth would know. And so these we might call hidden monsters. And pornography is one of those kinds of sins. It is easily hidden, but it is truly a monster. You realize that every second of every day, there are over 28,000 internet users viewing it every second. 1 in 5 Google searches are for it. First exposure, on average, is between age 8 and 11. Over 60% of Christian men regularly view pornography. Roughly 9.3 million females, yes, women, view it every year. And this sin affects old and young alike, male and female alike. I know personally I have counseled a couple in the past who both the husband and the wife were engaging in it separately, but hardly were ever together physically. And this becomes more and more common, I think, every day, way more than we might think. Viewing, it actually leads to actual chemical addiction. It leads to a life of lies and secrecy. It will deeply, deeply wound the ones that you love. It ruins relationships, and it is destroying souls, even right now as we speak. And yet, as we think about this topic, we also understand that there is hope. There is hope. God has not left us without understanding on this particular topic or any subject. He's not left us without weapons that we need, the things that we need to fight against it. Now, it's clearly condemned in passages like Galatians 5:19 through 21, Ephesians 5 and verse 3, 1 Thessalonians 4 and verse 3. We're told to put to death, therefore, what is earthly in you, including things like sexual immorality and impurity in Colossians 3 and verse 5. We're told to flee from sexual immorality, 1 Corinthians 6 and verse 18. And we're told just in the next chapter, 1 Corinthians 7, that the only place, the only area to gratify that desire is within the marriage relationship. So there's a lot of places that we could go to study this particular topic. But this morning, we're going to focus on the words of Jesus from the Sermon on the Mount. And these words were read for us earlier, but we'll focus specifically on verses 27 through 30. Jesus has this to say, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." So in this text and applying it to our topic this morning, what we're going to see is just two very simple, a two-step process, if you will, for fighting against this hidden monster. And to be successful in fighting against lust, first of all, Jesus advises that we diagnose the sin. He says, "You've heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you," you hear his authority in this, "but I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart." Now, Jesus supported the Jewish teaching that, yes, actual physical adultery was sinful. His listeners would have been very familiar with, of course, the seventh commandment, right? You shall not commit adultery, Exodus 20, verse 14, which was later repeated in Deuteronomy 5 and verse 18, very clear and very understood in the Jewish world that Jesus lived in. Adultery was sinful. Yes, under the law of Moses and also under the law of Christ. But Jesus, what he does in most of the Sermon on the Mount, he does with this topic. He takes it further. He goes on to say, further than the old covenant, that what I have to say to you is that everyone, not only who commits adultery, but looks at a woman with lustful intent, has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So the sin of lust, well, like all others, needs to be dealt with, killed at its source. But see, in order to kill the sin of lustful looking, we need to take a good, hard look at it in our own lives even and recognize this sin. Now, the Greek word used for looks is not a word used in passing. It's not an happenstance or an accident kind of thing. He's talking about a continual process of looking, a sustained, intentional stare. Fantasizing is what that word means. So as Peter would say, they have eyes full of adultery, 2 Peter 2 and verse 14. So we understand that Jesus is not referring to the viewing of pornography in the digital age, in the digital sense that is common today, but clearly that would fall under Jesus' teaching here. And we also understand that the Greek word for that we get our word pornography comes from is the Greek word porneia, which shows up 26 times at minimum in the New Testament, depending on your translation. We can think about the most prominent example of adultery in the Old Testament. You might think of David and Bathsheba. And that began with, guess what? Exactly what Jesus is dealing with here, lust. His lustful gaze while she was bathing in 2 Samuel chapter 11. We can think about the words of the blameless man, Job. He once affirmed, I have made a covenant with my eyes. Isn't that good? I have made a covenant with my eyes. How then could I gaze at a virgin? Job 31 and verse 1. And he actually went on to say that he had guarded his heart. He guarded his heart from being enticed by another woman. And that he was restrained from putting himself even in compromising situations. So we can learn a lot from the thoughts that Job had to say. But at the very core of what Jesus is teaching really goes back to, as we talked about last week, it's really just an unlawful use of God's gift in marriage. And so full enjoyment of physical expression can only be found by fulfilling God's commands within that relationship. Now, there's a lot of things that we want to talk about today, but one of the things we need to make sure is clear that this is not just an individual problem, brothers and sisters. As we think about this is not just a personal problem. This is a church problem. And you understand what I mean by that. This is not just a problem with just a select few, but it's actually quite common, even among those who are Christians, that claim to be Christians. And so what we mean by this is a church problem, as we as God's church cannot afford to bury our heads in the sand on this issue, because it is wrecking lives, and it is very present in brothers and sisters across our nation. In an article on this subject, Jack Wilkie with Focus Press, he offers 4 ways that churches can help end the pornography epidemic. And so in this lesson, I'd like to offer those things to you by way of application for all of us to think about. And the first one that he suggests is just very simple: talk about it. And it's simple, but it's also the very last thing we usually want to do. But he suggests, first of all, to talk about it. See, studies have shown that 64% or more of self-identified Christian men admit that they access illicit materials at least once a month. And again, that's the ones that admit to it. There are actually addicted men and women sitting in our church pews every Sunday fighting a silent battle against this hidden monster, and we never talk about it, and so they never know what to do about it. When we talk about it, not just to shatter the illusion that this sin only affects a few people, or that it's only those that really have a serious problem, but we also talk about it openly because we want to show those who struggle that we are committed in helping in this particular battle. See, hiding from certain sins because they're awkward doesn't help anybody. We're told in Ephesians 5 and verse 11 to take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. And so by talking about it, we fulfill that command and that principle. Secondly, suggested is to give safe channels for confession. Now, because of the way this particular addiction is looked down upon, it's a worse sin than others. That makes it really hard to confess if it's something that you're struggling with. And so the addict fears how that confession is going to change the way that people view them, and so they say nothing. They stay quiet, and that just allows the sin to get worse. But we want to make it clear, as brothers and sisters, God's family, that anyone who struggles, not just with this sin, but with any sin, can come to our elders, come to the minister, can come to others at any time for help. And what we want to commit to you is that we will respond in a very certain way. No matter what it is that you may confess to, that we will put our arm around you. And we will say, we all struggle with sin. But with God's help, we can get through this. We can get through this together. And that's exactly what Galatians 6, 1 and 2 commands us to do, is it not? If anyone is caught in any transgression, you who are spiritual should restore him in a spirit of gentleness. We're told to bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. Number 3, it's suggested to embrace the addict. And no, that word is not just reserved for those who are addicted to drugs and alcohol. We need to view this as an addiction. Anyone viewing on any kind of regular basis is an addict. And it is quite literally, I don't know if you realize this, but it is quite literally a high, a chemical dependency that causes you to go back again and again, just like drugs and alcohol. It is a constant cycle of this temporary, empty fulfillment followed by regret, shame, and brokenness. And this person, these people that are struggling with this don't need to be held at arm's length. They don't need further guilt about what they're going through. By their brothers and sisters. They need to be loved. They need to be encouraged. They need to be brought closer in to the family. And that's what we want to commit to. And then finally, build discipling relationships. Now, aside from this topic alone, but especially in this topic, it ought to be a regular part of church life. That there are healthy relationships between the older and the younger, between the spiritually mature and the spiritually weaker. You know, we're told in Matthew 28, 18 through 20 to make disciples, but he doesn't just stop with the idea of baptizing them, right? The idea of discipling means that we've got to teach people to observe all that Jesus commanded. And that doesn't really just happen. It doesn't just happen naturally. So in having these kind of relationships between brothers and sisters in a congregation, what that allows to happen is it allows the addict who's struggling to recover from whatever he's addicted to, but also to help others from falling into these kind of temptations and sins in the future. And so we need to take that thought seriously from Jesus in Matthew 28, 18 through 20 about building those discipling relationships. And there's a lot of things that we each could be challenged to do in a lesson like this. But I also understand that some may be thinking, well, I don't struggle with this. What can I do? Maybe you tune out a topic like this, but this is something that I would challenge you to consider, is to really work on this week. That if you're older in the faith, find somebody younger in the faith that you can get to know this week. And if you're a younger person, whether literally or just in the faith. Reach out to someone who's been around Christianity, who knows their Bible. Ask them to have a cup of coffee sometime. Get to know them a little bit more. As we talked about, really introducing the last 3 lessons with the idea of salt and light. You know, being the salt of the earth and the light of the world, it means a whole lot more than we give it credit for. Jesus means that we've got to get involved in each other's lives. Taking steps to fight this hidden monster among our congregation, you know, it's not a complicated formula. It just requires a willingness to wake up a little bit, to open our eyes to some reality of our world, to stand against the truth, or stand with the truth and stand against the damage that this sin is causing among people that we love and know, and love people enough to help them deal with the sin that they're caught up in. And so to be successful in fighting against this hidden monster, against lust in all its forms, well, we must diagnose the sin. We've got to see it for what it is. But Jesus goes on to say that we must destroy the temptation. He says, if your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. A commentator by the name of Mounts noted about what Jesus just said. It's ironic that the eye, which is supposed to prevent stumbling, well, it becomes the cause of a person to stumble sometimes, doesn't it? Jesus is clear about this sin, that it must be eliminated. But he says it's got to be eliminated at its source. Now, Jesus, we of course know that Jesus is not commanding literal dismemberment, but he's emphasizing that his followers have to do whatever it takes to get rid of sin in their lives. That's what he's saying. Whatever it takes. It's a kind of spiritual surgery of the heart, if you will. See, lust is not really an eye problem. It's a heart problem. Matthew 15, 18 through 20. So therefore, we have to take whatever measures necessary to control these natural passions. Admittedly, a few years ago, but I think quite appropriate, William Hendrickson wrote this: sin must be put to death. Temptation should be flung aside immediately and decisively. The surgery must be radical. Right at this very moment, without any wavering, the obscene book must be burned, the scandalous picture destroyed, the soul-destroying film condemned, the social tie broken, the painful habit discarded. In the struggle against sin, the believer must fight hard. Shadow boxing will never do. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than your whole body go into hell. How might Jesus rephrase this today, dealing with this particular topic in our age? I don't know, but maybe something like this. If your computer causes you to sin, find a college kid who needs a cheap laptop, sell it to them, get rid of your temptation in your household. If your phone causes you to sin, pack it up, send it back to the carrier, explain to them you're going to pay the last bill and you don't need their services anymore. Or find a non-smartphone. They still have those flip phones that has no ability to access the internet. You know, we've got to do whatever it takes, Jesus is saying. However that applies to you, whatever this looks like for you, you've got to do whatever it takes, maybe more than you think is necessary, because that's what's necessary. No, you can't always help what puts itself in front of you, and we understand that. but you can choose what to do with it. And you can do a whole lot of things to prevent it. And that's what Jesus is talking about. Now, this issue, as we've already talked about, must be dealt with between brothers and sisters. This is a church problem. But we also recognize that this issue must be dealt with in each and every Christian home. This is a household problem. And so that's why Jack Wilkie gives 4 ways to fight pornography in your home that I would like to suggest by way of application today as well. Now, the first step is exactly the same as the last list. It's talk about it. Talk about it within your home. Couples must be open with each other and immediately agree to confess any struggles or downfalls. The parent-child relationship must be completely open and have a dialogue about this topic. Parents have to come to grips with the fact, with the reality, that no matter how good their children are, this is going to seek them out. And if they don't know where to turn when that happens, it will turn into an addiction. Again, the average age of first exposure is somewhere between age 8 and age 11, and unintentionally at first. But by 18 years old, 90% of boys, 60% of girls have been exposed to it. See, parents, we need to expect this to happen. It will happen. And then we need to address this topic earlier than we might think before it happens if we can. And we do that because we want to establish a channel of communication in which our children can come to us when they find this. We absolutely cannot afford to not talk about this. We must talk about it within our families. And maybe you've had the talk, with your kids, but one short, uncomfortable, very vague talk is not going to cut it. Our kids are going to get this information somewhere. And so do we want to leave that in the hands of anyone else? Secondly, monitor each other's devices. Now understand, this is probably the simplest but most important thing that we can do to protect our families and yourself. If other people can see what you see, if other people know what you do on your device, then the temptation is almost completely destroyed. So let me just say this. No one in the house should have access to a device that only they can use. There is absolutely no reason for a husband to refuse his wife access to his phone or his tablet or his computer, and same for the wife. There is absolutely no reason for a child to have the kind of power over their parents where they can refuse them access to their device. Spouses need to know each other's passwords. Parents need to know the passwords of their children's devices, and they need to be checking them regularly, because pornography is persistent. And it fights hard to get into your home, and so you have to be even more persistent to keep it out of your home. Now, there are many relatively inexpensive and easy to use pieces of software that offer things like accountability, filtering, and parental controls. Now, I'll say this, every device, really think about it, every device should have some kind of accountability reporting software installed. And I'm not going to go into time to talk about all that. That's why I've included a list of options inside of your bulletin as well to give some details and some areas that you can go for this particular topic, but I'd be happy to help if you need help. But remember, we're talking about monitoring each other's devices. This is not about saying, I don't trust you, spouse, or I don't trust you, children. It's not a matter of trust. It's not about casting suspicion. It's about creating openness. That's all it is. It's about creating a culture of openness, protecting each other's souls. Thirdly, refuse to make excuses. Now, with as many lives as this sin is wrecking, if we truly understand the numbers and how terrible this is in people's lives, there is absolutely no place for excuses. Some will say, well, all that technology, it just goes over my head. Or, well, I'm really uncomfortable talking about that. So you'd rather your spouse or your child be dragged into a lifelong battle with sin that they may never win and cause them to go to hell just because you're uncomfortable. Or just because you won't take the time to learn about something new and make sure that it works to protect your family. Please take this threat seriously and refuse to make excuses. And finally, pray. Now, it's an obvious step, but it's one that we cannot neglect. Our God, you're with me on this, right? Our God will hear our prayers. Amen? Our God listens to our prayers. Our God does not want this in our home. And He will help us. He will help us if we turn to Him. The pornography industry works 24/7 to get anyone and everyone they can hooked on their product. And they spend billions and billions of dollars doing so, and they are good at it. We are at war. And so step up and fight. Make a commitment to keep this sin out of your home. If it's not already there, if it is, do everything you can to drive it out. It can be done. It can be done. Yes, it can be done. Your soul, the soul of your spouse, the souls of your children depend on it. Almost 2,000 years ago, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away, for it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell." And so Jesus simply suggests to us, demands and commands us to be successful in fighting against this hidden monster, lust, in all its forms. We must diagnose the sin. We've got to see it clearly. And then we've got to destroy the temptation at its source, do whatever it takes. But it also goes in that order. See, before we can fight against this monster, we have to be willing to recognize it. We've got to be willing to talk about it. See, the key is this. If there is one thing that should be communicated to every person struggling with pornography, it is this. Tell it. You have to tell it. You don't have to announce it publicly, but in order to find real healing, it must be told. It must be talked about. See, as long as the enslaved person keeps this secret to himself, no matter how determined he is to stop, he will return to wallowing in the mire, just as Peter had said. 2 Peter 2:22. But see, the beautiful part about that is if an addict is continuously communicating openly and specifically about his temptations or her struggles, it acts really as a daily vaccine for protection from this terrible secret enemy. James was wise, wasn't he? When he said, "Confess your trespasses to one another." James 5 and verse 16. Christ's blood was shed for every person struggling with pornography. And it is a blood so powerful that, yes, it takes care of not only the respectable sins, but also the unthinkable ones. See, he died for us while we were still sinners. Romans 5 and verse 8. We can take to heart the words of Paul when he said, "O wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death? I thank God through Jesus Christ our Lord." In Jesus there is hope. In Jesus there is hope, but only in Jesus. Will you come find that hope in Jesus today? You can meet me in the back. You can meet our elders in the front. Listen, you can meet us anytime but you can also come now while we stand and while we sing.